You're watching Common Ground, where we talk about the hot button topics of today
from a liberal
and conservative point of view.
I'm James Lacroix.
And I'm Mimzi Moon. So join us as we bridge the gap and try to find some common ground. Should I make my introduction?
Yeah,
like I always do, or you want to do it today, James?
No, you're good at it. I'm too tired. You do it.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone to our 4th edition of Common Ground. Today we have a very special guest. His name is Nick Grace. So everyone say hey to Nick Grace. Hey, Nick.
Hey, what's up, guys?
Want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sorry, I'm terrible at talking about myself.
That's okay.
Talk about anything but myself. I think it's just kind of in the job. I'm a music producer by trade these days, so I mostly record and compose music for other musicians, and yeah, that's kind of my specialty. Is I help other people with their voices. My voice isn't the one in the spotlight a lot of the time, so this is kind of an interesting take on things for me.
It will be today. That's probably, I guess, a good change of pace, right?
It's an interesting change of pace, yeah, because usually I'm the one helping my clients prep for like interviews and like, podcast appearances, not the one making them. So I kind of fumble a little bit.
It's okay. We can make sure you look good. So.
Well, I know I look good.
Oh, do you have your Tumblr? Cute. Yeah. All right. So let's try to dive into some topics, some conversation.
Yeah. What would you like to call this video? What is the topic for today?
The topic is essentially the racial disparity in America, whether or not it exists, and if it does, what is it? And obviously, since we don't have personal experience in this way, we have Nick Grace on to talk about his experiences. So if you want to, let's see, who wants to start with like a specific topic? Because like we all, I think, have.
I can start with a specific topic.
Okay.
Well, I can start with like a kind of a general overview on my feelings towards the whole racial divide situation in America.
Okay.
I have kind of a different perspective because I'm about 20 years older than most of the people that I talk to and hang out with, like in real life, like, and on the internet, So things were different back in the 80s as far as, racial division and racism and things like this. It's way worse now, and I know
I think it's worse now right now.
And they're like, oh, well, it was just underground. It was hidden. It was, nobody talked about it now, but I don't know, man. Like, we didn't care. We didn't. I had black boyfriends and girlfriends and friends and the music that we listened to, the artists that we liked, Michael Jackson, Janet Jackson, Prince, whatever. We never considered them black artists and white artists and our black friends and our it was just, we were all just people. We never paid any attention to that. We didn't give it any thought. We didn't give it our attention. It wasn't a thing. And I'm not saying that it never was a thing to anybody ever, anywhere, but for the people that I knew growing up, it wasn't like it is today. Now there's like tension between people, like you don't know how you're worried about how you're going to be perceived, what somebody thinks about you because of the color of your skin, how you should speak to somebody. It's very tense these days. You understand what I'm getting at?
Actually, I understand exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, I don't think it needs to be like this.
I would like to challenge that. I would like to challenge that, though, because it didn't used to be like that for you. So you never talked about it. Like, as you said, no one really cared around you, right?
Right.
Did you ever ask? Did you ever think to ask any of your black friends, like, if they dealt with anything? Did it ever even occur to you to ask?
I guess not. No.
See, this is a story I hear all the time from my mom because growing up, I'm supposed to be the black voice here, but in reality, like, we're going by the one drop rule because I'm mixed. I'm Italian and black. And my Italian father tells the same stories growing up oh, my mom was crazy. There was never any discrimination. She didn't get funny looks in stores. She was making it up. He never saw any of it. But she tried to tell him. And the thing is, he had the luxury of being oblivious to it. These days, we don't have the luxury of being oblivious to anything. Social media is piping all of the conflicting views into our faces 24/7, nonstop, at a breakneck pace. You can't ignore it even if you try to. But say you go back to the 80s, because like you said, you do have a decent age gap on a lot of us here. And okay, in the 80s, there was no internet. You weren't seeing black people getting shot in the street on video every other month, okay? You had your black friends and what they told you and what you talked about with them. And if it never occurred to you to ask, chances are you missed some subtle things that they had just gotten used to putting up with as part of life. So they said, fuck it, I'm not going to talk about it.
Okay, yeah, I've heard that before. I can see your point in that.
Okay,
If it was never a conversation to begin with, then the probability that maybe things were going on that didn't affect you personally is pretty high. Like you hear about things like retail discrimination, where like black people will get followed around stores and things like that. You were probably looking at a dress when that was happening to your friends, and there's nothing wrong with that. It wasn't happening to you, you know? But
Right.
like to say it wasn't happening is a little bit of a broad stroke.
Okay.
So here's my position. I have quite a lot of things, a lot of research and things like that. So my position is that Black people are oppressed in America and that racism still exists, and mostly it's on a systemic level. But I do think that the problem when it comes to the racial divide among regular people like you and me is more just kind of the oblivious factor, which is why like when people have conversations about things like white privilege and stuff like that, like I know that's like a really divisive way to put it, but it's the thing that like the way that I like to phrase it is it's not that we're necessarily trying to accuse white people of like having white privilege. It's just that it is a good idea to allow people who have not had these life experiences to understand that they exist. And that's all that conversation is really meant to be about. But it does become a lot of tribalism and a lot of like arguing and fighting back and forth, you know, when like just the internet and social media and the distance that you have whenever you can just say whatever you want on the internet. But so there are quite a few things like issues in general that I do want to go over, and I'm sure you know, we can have some good conversations about. So first of all, I'm just gonna like give a rundown and we can like hit each one as we go through it. I want to talk about housing discrimination and redlining. I want to talk about employment discrimination. And I want to talk about police discrimination and, you know, courtroom discrimination and things like that. And I think a big part of my focus is also going to be on like why this is a systemic issue. And it's to me largely due to, no offense, Mimzi, but conservative politicians. And I'll get into what I mean by that specifically.
I'm not a politician, so I don't know.
I know,
Take
I know, but you vote for them. So, and that's kind of like, I think a big part of where the divide comes from, because it's like, I understand why you, as a conservative, don't like it when people just assume that you're racist because you're a white conservative. And I don't think you are racist, but I do think that your party, like, especially on the political level and the systemic level, is racist. And a lot of people who vote for them, some people are not ignorant to that. Some of them know that that's what's going on, and others are ignorant to it, and they just like don't see it as a race issue when it actually is, like Nick was saying, because they've just never had those conversations. I would also like to present a few experiences that I had, not like me personally, obviously, but I grew up with my friend Aaron Rodgers, who is Black, and well, he's also mixed, like how Nick is, but like, you know, he's Black.
Hold on,
so,
Aaron
like,
Rodgers?
Yeah, that's his name, I know. Oh, and that'll be relevant to one of my stories, actually. But I've been with him when, okay, so here's two experiences that I have where I've personally seen like racism happen right in front of me, that people would probably deny if they weren't paying attention. So with Aaron Rodgers, I was driving in a white neighborhood in the suburbs, and I randomly got pulled over for some reason. I wasn't doing anything illegal, like I know how to fucking drive. But I had my friend Aaron with me in the car, and he's visibly Black. And he was in the passenger's seat. He's not driving or anything. I get pulled over, and the cop asks me for my ID and then asks him for his ID. And that immediately I was like, that's not normal. Cops usually don't need your passenger's ID. They only need the driver's identification. And he told me that he pulled me over because I didn't have front license plate, which I don't need to have front license plates. So I think he pulled me over to profile Aaron. However, fortunately, Aaron is an extremely charismatic person, and his name is Aaron Rodgers, and the officer was very amused by that. So they had like a joking conversation about it, and like, you know, he didn't do anything and we left. But like afterwards, I reflected on that and I was like, I got pulled over because there was a black person in my car. Like there's like, it's kind of hard for me to
think happened though. Like that's your perception.
What do you think happened?
Well, I don't know. I wasn't there and I'm not in the point of view for the officer. I'm not sure what he was thinking, but you know, there is something to be said for believing that you think something, you know, because if you're looking for racism or you believe.
I wasn't.
Yeah, but if you think that, okay, in a situation like this, it is possible that somebody might perceive somebody as having a racial motivation when maybe their motivation may have been something else. Maybe he had to fill a quota that day. Maybe he always asks for everyone's ID. Maybe he's just
if he was filling a quota,
maybe you know, like people can see.
Wouldn't be able to fill a quota because he didn't give a ticket.
Maybe in your case that really was racism, but you know, it is possible.
I'm just giving you an example. Like I understand
racism where it doesn't exist because they think they're looking for
Here's the thing, and especially at this point in my life, I was not really like, you know, really looking for racial issues. Like I was kind of oblivious at that point in my life. And it took me a bit to realize that that's what had happened. And Aaron never brought it up. Like he just, you know, we never really talked about it. And like to me,
who knows?
Yeah, exactly. That was the impression that I got when I did think back about it. Cause I was like, that has never happened ever. I've never had an officer ask my passenger for their driver's license. And I've been pulled over with other people in my car that were white. And that didn't happen. So I think that they probably had like a suspect that they were looking out for that was a black guy. And so they saw a black guy in my car and they pulled me over. You know, that's what I think happened. And I'm not saying that like, yeah, go ahead.
Serious question. Did the officer say anything to you out loud about warrants?
No, he didn't. So
all right,
I don't think so anyway.
Let me tell you exactly what probably happened. Now, I don't know this from any recent information, but I know this from my grandfather, actually, who just so happens to be one of the first black detectives that Milwaukie, Wisconsin ever saw. A lot of police systems in like conservative-run states still have a lot of codes that date back to slave-catching patrols. If you actually go on Google right now, you don't have to believe me. Just look up slave catcher's badge. It's the same badge that modern cops wear on their uniforms. It's kind of absurd. And there is actually a policy in Wisconsin. If you pull over a person of color, you're supposed to check for warrants for their arrest. It does not matter if there's any suspicion there to begin with. It is actually a written part of the Milwaukie Police Code. You're supposed to do that. And it was that way when my grandfather was on the force. He tells me about that every time I get checked for warrants. I've never been arrested in my life. I always get checked for warrants for my arrest every time I meet a cop. And they're pretty open about it when they're talking to an all-black audience usually. But it's like something that they're not super loud about. But like that was legitimately a rule cops had to follow. If you pull somebody over and they're black, check and make sure you don't have to arrest the person. Because their codes are just adapted slave catcher codes.
That makes sense. Well, and that's another thing that is like in my notes, not that specifically because I didn't know that. That's interesting information, but sort of that theme of like a lot of these things are just held over from those kinds of policies. So that's one example. Another example that, again, maybe Mimzi will see this differently. And again, I wasn't looking for racism at this point in my life. I was kind of oblivious. And like, it was kind of a culmination of these events that made me really start thinking about it. But I used to work at GameStop. And it was in a very white suburban area. Like it was up in Fox Point, which Nick probably knows more about what I'm talking about than Mimzi does. But that's where like all the rich white people live.
Fox Point, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So I was working at GameStop up there back when it was still open up there. And a guy comes into the store and he's black and he comes right up to the counter and he asks for the new, like, there was like a new game that had just been released that day, and he wanted that, and then he also like put a reserve down on a different game. And so I was like, sweet, I got a reserve. That's important when you work at GameStop. We had a conversation briefly about how cool the game was, and then he left, and it was a perfectly wonderful transaction. Everything went swimmingly. And then like 5 minutes later, the police call my store, and I was the only one working right now. And they were like, hey, is everything okay? And I was like, yeah, why? And they're just like, oh, we just saw like a suspicious person go in there. And I was like, what was suspicious about him? And they were like, well, he just like, took the bus and then got off the bus and went in and then got back on the bus immediately after he left. And I was like, some people don't drive. Some people take public transportation. But anyway, I was just like, yeah, everything's fine, and like hung up. And it took me a bit to realize like, oh, they meant he was black when they said he was suspicious. Like, to me, like that's kind of how that comes off, because there wasn't any, like there's really nothing inherently suspicious about public transportation. So, and he had like a bag, from the store with him. And
who was watching? Who was the police?
Yeah, the police called my store.
They
had just been
the GameStop to see if there was any suspicious people coming in and out.
I guess. Like, I don't really know. Well, they didn't have a lot to do in that neighborhood because there's not any crime up there. But
when there is something, black people in that neighborhood.
This is like a 99% white neighborhood. Like, there's no black people that live there that I know. The experience that I had while I was working at GameStop, and it stood out to me. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, like both you and Nick, obviously.
Oh, you want to hear my thoughts on it? Just like I said before, it's the same kind of thing. Like, you don't know what was really going on behind the scenes. I find that very bizarre that just because somebody was shopping in your store that was black, that they were so suspicious of his blackness that they needed to call to make sure you were all right. I don't get that. Maybe he is a suspect. That person.
A suspect of what?
That just happened to be black was a suspect in something, and they wanted to make sure that he, maybe he's known for robbing stores, and they want to make sure, they're not.
That guy wasn't known for robbing stores. I'm pretty confident.
Maybe they think he somebody. Maybe he looked like somebody that they had their eye on or something. I mean,
that's the thing. I feel like a lot of, and maybe this isn't true, but to me it almost comes off like. I hate to bring up the like racial blindness argument, but it is almost like they think all black people look the same and they can't tell the difference between this one and a different one. You know what I mean?
Do black people feel the same way about white people, that we all look the same? I think they do, right?
Oh, a lot of racial blindness happens both ways. Like Asian people can't tell the difference.
When it comes to white people, the jokes are real. Like, I don't know how you made it this long having black friends without catching all these jokes.
Oh, I've got them personally, but.
Yeah, she said, "Do you guys get the we all look the same too?" Man, honestly, sometimes black people can be cruel with our humor. I'm not gonna lie.
So all white people talk the same, I think, to black people.
Yeah, it's pretty even, I don't know.
Also, this isn't a thing with just white and black people. Like, racial blindness happens across the board. Like, Asian people have joked about this too. Like,
don't they look a lot alike?
Anyone with foreign facial features, because depending on the ethnicity of a person, use certain facial features to differentiate person to person. Anyone with foreign facial features or facial features that aren't common among your usual group of people, they're all going to look really similar to you because the differences are going to stick out. Like, your nose is pointier than mine. That's just what it is. Your lips are smaller than mine. That's just what it is. It looks a little bit weird to a guy who's grown up around primarily black people, but it's like there's nothing wrong with it. It's just foreign. That's the same reason we're attracted to people who look exotic, it's because, I haven't seen that before. That's cool.
So Asian people, they do tend to look a lot alike, to me and a lot of other white people.
I have so many Asian friends that I have an easier time with it, but I get it. Like, I understand.
Yeah, but
they think we all look alike too.
Like if you
Asians can tell what
each other, right? Because they're used to.
They can tell what kind of Asian they're talking to, anytime that they're talking to somebody, if it's a different.
Well, yeah, because they've been trained to use different facial differentiators than we as Westerners have. That's why we have trouble with it.
So, but anyway, those are my experiences that I had. That, in my view, those are the kinds of things, I guess, that stood out to me that I started to piece together as I got older and started to really consider the reasoning behind this. Because again, to put this all out there, full disclosure, like, I mean, I've always been liberal and I've always been on the left. I didn't always believe that like Black people were like actively oppressed in America. Like, I don't know, 5 or 10 years ago, like I wasn't really convinced, and I was like, oh, that's all done with, right? And it was really just like a culmination of these experiences that I had around my friends that were Black or people that were Black, and, you know, learning more and more about these issues as I got older. And I told you, Mimzi, that I was very involved in politics the more that I grew up. So like, I didn't start off from that position. I became convinced. So because of that, I feel fairly confident I can tell you some things that you don't know about that are pretty disturbing about why I think Black people are oppressed in America still. And one question I want to ask you, and I would really love to know the answer to, at what point do you think white Americans stopped being racist? Like what year, what decade?
You're asking me what year white Americans stopped being racist?
Or like what decade, what era, at what point in history 70s. Do you think? The 70s?
Yeah.
You think the 70s is when America stopped being racist?
Yeah.
Why? Out of curiosity, just why? Like,
I don't know. I feel like there was a lot of racism in the 60s with, you know, the Jim Crow era and all that, but it stopped by the 70s, and people began to see people for being people and not just for this color of their skin.
Why? What changed?
I don't know. Times change. People change.
Nick, what is your theory out of curiosity? I mean, I know you probably aren't going to answer like you don't think there was an era that people stopped being racist, but like just out of curiosity,
there's people still racist to this day, all colors of skin. Like,
no, I know.
Okay. It's kind of it's a tribalism kind of thing, and people.
I just mean like the zeitgeist. I'm just talking about
than them, and
I'm just talking about.
So here's my theory, right? Here's my theory. I don't think that your average mainline white American was ever even all the way racist selling. I think propaganda is a powerful machine. And what happens is the people who were in power had a specific agenda. Like people in color, not just Black people of color in general, have been tried to be kept down through various means. We had Asian internment camps during World War II. The only reason marijuana is illegal is because Mexicans smoked it. And they wanted the reason to lock up Mexicans. That's widely documented. Okay, our country was founded on slavery. Love it, hate it, whatever. You can't ignore that Black people were in chains for hundreds of years here. Like, that's what this country is built on. And because it was built on that, it was also built on certain perceptions of certain types of people that were internalized over the years. I'm not saying every white person ever born wants to come and lynch me, but every white person ever born was raised in a bubble of other white people who were raised on this stuff that foundationally was built on the backs of my ancestors who were chained. And so in some way, if you're not actively yourself trying to find and root out all of the elements of your life that are still fueled heavily by that ancient racism, then you're at the very least complicit in the problem if you're not active in it. And there are some people who are still active in it. The cops gunning down unarmed Black people, who I'm pretty sure everyone across the board who's not a racist zealot themselves agrees, like, you should never shoot a man who doesn't have a gun in his hand. It just doesn't make sense, no matter what color he is, right? Or the retail employees that are obviously following people. I don't think anyone agrees that's good, normal, civilized human behavior. That's just like wrong to make somebody feel uncomfortable in a place of business. And that happens, and that's a small handful of people. And what the rest of white people in America are doing, I think, is what you're doing right now. They're playing the plausible deniability card. It's okay, well, something else could have happened. I don't know the whole story. And also, this subject makes me kind of uncomfortable, so I don't want to speak in any absolutes on it when I don't know the whole story. Anything else could have happened. And that gray area right there, that's where the actual racists thrive. The actual hateful, spiteful human beings who just want me dead because I'm Black, they thrive in that blanket of plausible deniability. I don't think most white people in America fall into that. I don't. I just think people believe what they're advertised, what they're told, and what they're sold half the time. And for hundreds of years, white people were sold the idea that Black people were savage, scary, financially unstable psychopaths, basically. And then on top of that, you take the war on drugs and how, go listen to some of the interviews from, Nixon's administration about the war on drugs.
I have that on my notes.
Yeah, they literally implanted drugs in communities of colors just to change the stigma about those communities' leaders
and associate them with crime. That was intentional. That's something that happened, and that was past the 70s, miss. That happened beyond the 70s. The American government did that. So I think what happens is you get a handful of really powerful racists who now have a platform to change public perception. And normal people who aren't really racially motivated are being motivated by the very, very convincing arcs that these racists are painting. That's what tends to happen to your average white American. They're not all Nixon, but all you need is one Nixon. I think one thing that's important to note is I am the black voice on the show today, but I'm not the black voice. And I want to make that completely and abundantly clear, because I think that's a mistake a lot of people make when discussing black people in general, is we discuss them as kind of like a single pillar,
like a collective.
Oh, this is good for black people, this is bad for black people, right? But we don't really do that with any other ethnicity in this country. And like, least of all white people. Like if I said, oh, this would be good for all white people, I would have a line of white people ready to beat down the door to my comment section to tell me
probably
exactly
black
why
people
I'm
too,
wrong.
honestly.
And probably black people too, honestly, because, we all got friends, but like, that's just the thing is like, I am a black person who has had a black experience. I do not represent the black experience. I just represent a black experience. Right. And I want to make that abundantly clear. Like I'm honestly, Mimzi, you might be shocked by this, but like I tend to lean more libertarian with a lot of my political views, so I'm more right-leaning than James is here.
Oh yeah,
but
yeah,
the average black person is definitely, usually going to vote more liberal based on just statistics and general purpose numbers from political scientists. Like that's the landscape of my community. So like I already don't represent the norm, if you will. I'm just a black guy who's lived a black life.
I really appreciate that. So I appreciate your point of view. And it's really it's nice to know that you're not a Democrat.
Yeah, no, I told her that you're not a Democrat.
I like different points of view. It's refreshing to me to see anyone who thinks for themselves. And I feel the same way about James. James thinks for himself.
I'm a pretty big fan of just general purpose reading too. Like, I've often quoted Malcolm X to James. I've read pretty much everything Thomas Sowell's ever published. If you're not familiar with Sowell's work, he's a pretty famous like black economist and sociologist. He's got I'm gonna say it was either Harvard or Princeton. You know Sowell?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Like his stuff is.
I mean, I'm not an expert, but I've watched documentaries and stuff. So. I like him.
Yeah, no, I just like that. And then on the other end of things, like I've also read stuff like about and, by Marcus Garvey, who is a pretty famous like black anti-capitalist. I don't think it's fair to call what he was on like a Marxist route, but it was very, very socialist adjacent. But like he was also a pretty famous black freedom fighter.
That's
so it's
my
like,
alley.
Yeah, that's more your lane. My thing is like, I'm a solutions guy. I worked in computers before I worked in music production, and then working in music production, my job has basically been since I was 17 years old. I put things together so that they work. That's the gist of it. And so I have my allegiances, yes, but I'm more of like, okay, here's the problem. How do we fix it? That's how I tend to approach things.
Yeah, I think I personally knew that Mimzi would probably like this attitude that you personally approach things with, because that's very much the way she sees things as well. And I do want to get into that topic because I know that's on your list of topics, Mimzi, of like personal responsibility and finding solutions and things like that. But
and I understand that I can be pretty ignorant of like the black experience, and I do respect you letting me know like how things are from your point of view. I've had a kind of a sheltered life, I guess, in a way.
Mm-hmm. You've had lots of experiences, but they're always going to be different from.
They're all from a very specific point of view, though. I haven't expanded my point of view until recently.
Yeah, and that's important to note, because what a lot of people consider identity politics are more perspective politics than anything. It's what kind of people were you around and what kind of person are you? That's usually going to inform your stance more than a lot of other factors.
Yeah, for sure. I'm trying to remember what topic I was
part of the reason that I want to do this show is I'm trying to expand my horizons. I'm trying to develop who I am more.
I really respect you for all of that, Mimzi. Yeah,
and to know why it's a lot more difficult to I mean, it's easier just to join a side and
just to adopt their viewpoint, right? Yeah.
Yeah, than to really have self-reflection, to look within yourself and try to discover why it is that you believe the way you are, and then stand up for it because you have a foundation for believing that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely.
Listening to everyone else.
To quote my big brother, the majority of people, no matter what kind of people they are, don't want to learn, they want to be put on. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that expression, to be put on to something.
No,
but,
what does that mean?
So when somebody says put me on, it basically means show me how you do it so I can do the same thing. So the majority of people don't actually want to learn. They don't want to think critically about things. They don't want to develop their own methodology. They want to be put on. They want somebody to tell them, this is how you do it because I said this works, and they just want it to work. And if you've been put on to a method of living your life that hasn't really bothered you or caused you much inconvenience, you're not likely to question it the whole time.
Well, and like the majority of the population are followers. That's like, it's like a human social evolution thing. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
that's just how it's always going to be. So it makes sense that the majority of the population is just going to want someone to tell them how to think. That's why we have leaders in the first place. So
instructions are easier than questions. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Instructions are easier than questions.
Yeah.
There you go. That's exactly what I was trying to get at.
Yeah. Okay, so back into topics. Okay, so I'm going to lay out, I guess, my total perspective on like the specific issue that I see in America with Black people. To me, there's a pipeline, and here is what I see from beginning to end. First of all, there is discrimination in housing and employment, as I mentioned, that keeps Black people confined to particular neighborhoods. Those neighborhoods are deprived of public service funding, like public schools, public transportation, things like that, for political reasons. And so they're remaining in these neighborhoods that have these disadvantages already. So because of that, they're financially disadvantaged. And when you have poverty on a systemic level, it leads to a lot of crime and a lot of drug abuse and things like that, escapism and desperation. That's what breeds those kinds of issues. So you have those neighborhood problems. And so then you have a lot of police involvement because there's a lot of crime in this neighborhood. And they end up developing this subconscious bias that Black people equals crime because these neighborhoods that are largely Black have a lot of crime. And so that intrinsic bias comes out in a lot of different ways in the court system with police. I know that, you know, the amount of actual unarmed Black men that get killed by police doesn't seem like a substantial number, but when you compare it like statistically to the amount of like Black people versus white people in America, Black people are like over 2 times as likely to get killed if they are in that same kind of situation with a police officer and they're unarmed. And that's not good, you know, no matter how you look at it.
How do you, okay.
Sorry, I'll finish and then I'll let you get your questions and stuff. So then we end up with a lot of Black people in jail or in prison, and the prison system is extremely oppressive, and it really doesn't rehabilitate people or let them get back into society easily. It just kind of stagnates their life at that point a lot of the time. And Black people also, there's numerous documents proving this, but Black people tend to get longer sentences than white people for minor crimes. And so because of that, they end up in these, and we have a lot of private prisons in the country, which are disgusting in my opinion. But in these private prisons, like Black people's labor is essentially exploited for like pennies a day. So it's kind of technically slavery in a way.
Oh no, it's literally slavery. Have you ever actually read the text of the Emancipation Proclamation?
I haven't, honestly. I should, but I get the gist of it, obviously, but you know. Okay,
good old Honest Abe. Everyone loves to talk about him like he was this great, like, you know, defender of public rights or whatever. Honestly, Honest Abe ran the Oval Office a lot more like Trump than people think he did. And one of the things he did was he did a lot of executive orders and didn't actually pass a whole lot of actual legislation. The Emancipation Proclamation was an executive order. That was not law. That was an executive order that basically expired at the end of Lincoln's presidency. But what it said, and it set a legal precedent here, was no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And that last thing is important because it left any of the southern states that were being re-annexed after the Civil War a back door to go back and reclaim their once enslaved peoples. That's why police officers' badges are so reminiscent of slave catchers' badges, is because originally that was the purpose of police in a lot of areas where Black folks were settling down, was to go in, find them guilty of a crime, at which point, per the president's executive order, it is now legal to deprive them of life, liberty, and property. That was in the Emancipation Proclamation. Yeah. The same thing we congratulate this guy on because it supposedly ended slavery, legalized it. It just gave them the ability to write on paper, oh, this is the reason you're a slave now.
Yeah, I did know that, even though I haven't read that text, but you put it way more succinctly than I could have, so thank you. But yeah, so there's this pipeline that essentially leads to modern day slavery. And it may not seem racist from a lot of perspectives, like in the cogs, you know, along the way and like between you and me. But when it comes to the people that created the system, it's completely intentional. Like it is. And there's evidence in this, in the origins of it, like Nick is saying, with the police and also Nixon. Nixon and Reagan were buddies and they had a lot of racist opinions and, you know, they were trying to sort of keep it on the down low, but like conversations have leaked and like they're straight up racist, like they are. Like they said things about leaders of Black countries that were really abhorrent. And they kept trying to pin it on each other so that not one of them had to take responsibility for it. But the fact of the matter is that Nixon and Reagan were both racist buddies, and they instituted a lot of these systems that still affect people today, because a lot of these laws were not that long ago. They were a few decades ago, right? And so a lot of these things, acts from like the 60s, the 70s, and 80s, we still have, you know, in some form or another. And they are a lot of things like the war on drugs, the war on crime. Those are things that sound acceptable. You know, drugs are bad, crime is bad, but this is what we mean when we say things like dog whistle. It's actually going after Black people. It's just kind of being subtle about it, at least to the people who are, you know, wanting to be oblivious enough to not see it that way. And a lot of these presidents were racist, like provably racist, and they made laws that on paper, you know, like when you hear about them, they don't seem like that's what the intention is. But when you look at the demographics that are specifically targeted by it and how and why, like it's still always hurting Black people specifically.
The thing is that it can never actually appear to be targeted because, again, right. If we get back to just like the case of general purpose humanity, the average white person either just isn't consciously racist or isn't racist enough that they actually are willing to participate in any violence themselves. Okay, that's not your average white person's experience.
Yeah,
so
that was actually what I was thinking about for sure.
Yeah, you can't pitch them something that's gonna appear as if they're the hand holding the whip, because the average, you know, person, even in a position of power during the suppression, would be like, that seems off. You almost have to hide it so that only the people who are really reading into the agenda know what's going on. Mimzi, I haven't heard from you in a while. Anything you want to chime in on?
Just been listening, which is good.
Yeah, I'm listening.
Great,
I'm learning. I'm listening. I do have I have notes. I do have.
I do want to hear your notes, and I totally will.
I'm a good listener.
The thing that I wanted to bring up with Reagan and Nixon is, I can't remember if it was them specifically or if it was a different politician, but have you ever heard of, it's called like the South strategy or something like that? I can't remember exactly what it's called. I thought I took a note on it, but I'll have to look it up. But it's basically like there was a literal political strategy that the Republican Party had during like the 70s-ish era, where they specifically planned to reclaim the South politically by appealing to the racists. And that involved having these laws that are racist, but they like look not racist enough that it like passes. That's actually a thing that like I still need to find the name of it, and when I do I'll tell you what it is, but it exists. It's an agenda. So anyway, but I do want to give you the floor and let you say some things if you want to, obviously.
Who, me?
Yes, you. You're the good listener.
Yeah, all right. This is difficult for me a little bit because I do feel like like I don't know a lot of the things that y'all know, you know? So I really have to come at things from a place of ignorance, and that's not really a strong place to come from, you know?
No,
I have ideas, I have thoughts, I have beliefs, I have, you know, I have things that I believe in. I would like to know what y'all's opinions are on the things that I
know you have some topics on your list, and I would love to address them. So feel free to ask any of those questions that are on your list.
I'd rather just almost phrase them as questions then, you know, how do you feel about,
like I said, I know you
have, or this thing that I've heard.
Yeah, I know that you are not racist, and you just don't know about these issues, and that was the way that I was going to approach this conversation from the get-go. So,
okay, yeah, thank you,
because
that's true. I'm not racist, and I just don't know about these issues.
Right, that's okay.
You know, a lot of the people that I listen to on YouTube, and like I don't have a lot of Black friends. Okay, I'm not going to sit here in front that I do. I did in the past. I used to have a clique. Yeah, I used to have a clique in a group, and it was very mixed. But that was back in my day or whatever. These days, not only do I not have a lot of Black friends, I just don't have a lot of friends. And not that people don't like me. I mean, I know there's people who don't like me, but that's not the point. It's just that I'm a loner. I just really am.
Yeah. I get that. I am that way too.
That's my life. Yeah. So that's just the way that I've set it up. I have my family, and they meet a lot of my needs for companionship and everything. And I have James, and he's my best friend. So you
only got into politics like 4 years ago, 5 years ago, maybe. So it's like, it's understandable that you don't know all of this history. I don't expect you to.
Right.
Yeah, it is called the Southern Strategy, apparently. That is what it was called. It is a Republican Party electoral strategy to increase political support among white voters in the South. I'm reading Wikipedia, by the way, by appealing to racism against African Americans. That's the thing. It was an intentional strategy that Republican politicians had. So anyway, but please ask away. I would love to.
I'm just going to attack a couple things on my list because it helps me. I'm glad I have this because it helps me organize, because I get kind of overwhelmed. Like, I'm hearing both of you and I'm just sitting here going like, maybe I should just shut up. But I don't, you know, this is my show
whatever
too.
You do, don't
I ain't gonna shut up. I got shit to say.
Do not shut up, because honestly, even though you pointed out that you might be a little bit ignorant on certain topics, I think what people lose a lot of times in these conversations is that the voice of ignorance is still an important voice. There are a lot of people who are ignorant on these topics. Those are human beings who we have to coexist with and figure out a way to live with. So if we can't figure out a way to either A, educate people, or B, live with ignorance in a way that isn't harmful, then we're ignoring a huge part of human life. Yeah. So I don't think there's anything invalid about having a less educated perspective on something. That's still a perspective, and it's still one we're going to encounter in the real world.
I understand. I totally understand what you mean. And I'm willing to take on that role sometimes. I've even said, I think I mentioned it to James, just saying take one for the team. You know, I don't mind representing. I don't mind representing my side, even if it's not necessarily the correct side or the informed side. I don't mind being the one that represents it. I don't.
It's honestly, it's very helpful because a lot of the points and the questions and things that you have are things that I hear from the right all the time, or from conservatives, or in general, from people. And I want to be able to answer those questions. So when you ask them and I can tell you answers, anyone else who has those same questions and is watching this conversation will also get that answer. And I think it's great for you to represent that demographic. It's really important. I agree. So yeah, by all means.
All right. Well, let me just start at the top here in no particular order. Okay. All right. This is something that I really believe. I think that it's a terrible idea to tell Black people that they're oppressed. There's a lot of Black people out there that don't believe they're oppressed, that maybe didn't realize they were oppressed. Maybe, why would you want to it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If someone believes that they're oppressed, they're going to go through life seeing oppression wherever they turn. So why
you believe it's demoral?
Why give it this attention and have people believe that, oh my God, you know what? I am oppressed. So I see it now, and then they internalize that, and then, that becomes their life. You know what I mean? So how do you address something like that? Do I not have a point there?
You definitely have a point as far as like, okay, hearing that all the time, not the greatest thing for, your mental health. But then you really have to ask yourself, and you have to weigh what is more important. Avoiding psychological entropy, or as we call it, stress within the Black community, or avoiding the roadblocks that do still persist in this country that are real for us. Because if we don't talk about it, the thing about the Black community is standards of education are significantly lower. That was actually one of the topics that I was kind of like forewarned about that we might get into, is public schools. Like, we are not briefed on a lot of this stuff in schools. If we don't take up our own reading, which, by the way, like, even in the age of the internet, like, connectivity, reading materials, general purpose education on even how to learn, it just is not the same for us. So if the largest demographic conversations,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, if we don't keep these conversations alive, then we'll be very easy to play. And even though you don't represent one of those people, there are people out here who would like to play us out of things or just straight up take things from us. I mean, there was a whole lot full of guys carrying tiki torches. I'm sure we all remember them, and I'm sure none of us would really throw ourselves in with that lot. So, like, let's just be real. There are people out there right now who would take advantage of our ignorance if we were ignorant to the fact that we were playing the game at certain disadvantages.
Okay, I see your point. But
all I was going to add is the as far as demographics that don't have internet access in America, like, the largest demographic is Black people. So, like, that's another education roadblock, is like the systemic poverty often leads to a lack of access to this information. So, Oh, when we were talking about basically like white supremacist groups and things like that, I know you mentioned in one of your notes that the amount of violence done by white supremacists is pretty minute. And that is technically true. The bigger problem is the voting population. It's not necessarily just the violence, which, I mean, like, that has been an issue in, historically, but even nowadays where maybe hate crimes are statistically not that common, these people are still voting and still part of a large community that votes against the interests of these disadvantaged people, not just Black people, but like, all disadvantaged people. So that's, to me, more the harm than just like lynchings. Not that that's not bad, obviously.
Yeah, it's a totally different topic.
Yeah. I'm just trying to like link it into, I know you had that one on your notes too, so I just wanted to.
Yeah. I'm still kind of thinking about like the first thing that I just said, like, as far as like, I understand your point where, people just don't realize that they're being oppressed. Maybe they need to realize it, right? So they can act on it. So they cannot be shoved under the rug, so to speak.
Yeah, because shoving a problem under the rug never fixes it. It might make you feel better for a while, but like long term, that's not a really sustainable strategy. Or like, let's just take like his example of white supremacists not being super dangerous in terms of like their actual body count. Okay, sure. But how dangerous, let's take your logic now of you don't want to send the wrong message to Black people. It might be demoralizing, right? How dangerous is a message of say, oh, this cop just gunned a guy down in the street, just kneeled on his neck until he died, just did insert inhumane action here to a Black person, and he's getting off scot-free. We're actually paying him to not work right now, and he's not getting any jail time. What kind of message does that send? If telling people you're oppressed is demoralizing, what is that?
Well, statistically, don't the police kill more white people than they do Black people? I know there's a greater white population, so that actually makes sense. But I mean,
yeah, the disproportionately.
Sometimes police are just assholes with too much power, and they go around killing people. It doesn't necessarily mean it's racially motivated.
But there is actually statistical data to suggest that it is racially motivated. Yes, police gun down more white people than they do Black people. But if you look at the percentage of Black people who have been either arrested or shot because of an interaction with police versus the percentage of white people based on total number of interactions, you'll see that it's much more frequent for people of color to end up with those interactions resulting in either gunplay or arrest. That's just what happens.
But
and even though white people are like, representing the larger body count, like you said, they also represent a larger part of the population. We'd expect to see that. What we don't expect to see is a disproportionate percent of the interactions that police have with people of color result in violence or arrest.
Could that have any correlation with the fact that people of color are resisting arrest? Because
actually, I have a note on this. Black people resist arrest less than white people.
What now?
White people resist arrest much more frequently than black people do. But white people are like not punished as much for doing it. So black people actually statistically resist arrest much less frequently because they're afraid to, understandably. But also the other factor to put in here is when black people resist arrest a lot of the time, and when they're like resisting arrest and they haven't done anything, it's because they know they're being unfairly detained, and they know that there's a implicit court bias, and they know that the prison system will chew them up and spit them out again, and they won't ever have a normal life. So they're very afraid of going to court for something that they didn't do. So that's what drives them to like panic in that moment and then resist arrest. But statistically speaking, just saying black people resist arrest a lot less frequently than white people do. So.
Yeah, and then also you have to look at what resisting arrest actually is, because often you'll hear officers throw around resisting arrest, but what resisting arrest actually means is you're fleeing from a police officer while being arrested, threatening that police officer with physical violence, or you're providing them with false identification to make yourself harder to arrest. So unless you can prove that a person of color was passing around a false ID or about to attack this guy to prevent themselves from being arrested, they're not actually resisting arrest. What they're doing is they're being moderately uncomfortable, pissed off, uncooperative, whatever it may be, with a police officer, because go figure, no one's really happy when they get pulled over or stopped on the street by a cop. I don't care what color you are, it just doesn't make anybody happy. And then cops are interpreting this mild discomfort with the lens of perceived black anger. I'm not sure if you ever heard of this, but there's like a stigma in specific parts of the country, more or less, but like pretty much all over, of black people being angry or violent or in some way to be feared because of our emotions. So you see a black person getting emotional, you're about to arrest this guy, a cop will chalk it up as a resisting arrest, but did this person actually flee the police officer, attack the police officer, provide them false identification? Most of the time when they claim this, they didn't. Like, again, look at any of the cases that have been in the news lately, right? Guy had a whole knee on his neck, was suffocated by a police officer with a knee. It would not have been resisting arrest if he would have tried to push the knee off of his neck, okay? That officer is trying to kill him without due process, without a trial by a jury of his peers. He doesn't have to take that. That's not resisting arrest by definition.
Yeah, also a lot of the time, like even if black people are simply questioning why they're being detained by a police officer or claiming that they shouldn't be, which like a lot of the time is true, that is considered resisting arrest, which obviously it's not resisting arrest. Like you have a right, like white people or black people, you have a right to question why you're being detained, or you have a right to know why the police officer is detaining you, or like, if you didn't do anything, like they can't just act like you did anyway. Like they don't do that to white people, like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you do have a right. Unless you're in the process of committing an act of violence or theft, usually you can sit there and actually make them bring you your paperwork, because if they're going to take you in, you have a right to see why and who authorized it. But oftentimes they'll take that as a sign of you being obstinate or trying to evade the law, resisting arrest. Because God forbid, again, that you break out of your bubble of ignorance and actually educate yourself on, what are my rights with the police? Because we're not supposed to have any. That's not how the police were set up. We're not actually supposed to be able to play by the rules. That's why they prevented us from reading for hundreds of years. That's why they intentionally made our schools worse in the early days of black education and straight up burned libraries in black communities. That was the thing. They didn't just burn churches, they burned libraries, they burned Black Wall Street, they burned centers of commerce, education, and religion, because developing culture, developing intelligence, developing the ability to play this game of chess that is life fairly was not something we were ever supposed to do. And now that we can, now that, excuse my French here, but now that niggas know how to read, they got to find other ways to play us out of our,
right.
you know.
And when we say
freedom.
they, like, we're talking about, like we said, the elite political powers and the systemic powers here, not like everyday people like you and me, maybe, but like there are people that have these motives. Like they have them, they still exist. Like the thing I was getting at earlier is like there are still racists now. Like racists didn't just go away. Like it didn't just all vanish randomly. The general population has always been kind of grossed out by it, understandably, but the people who are not still exist and they still have foundations. Another thing I was going to...
Systemic racism that people are talking about then.
Yeah, and that's what I mean, that's what a lot of this is like the police systemic racism. Like, you know, you and I aren't officers arresting black people, obviously, but if we just let that happen and don't do anything about it, like, then I do feel like we're complicit.
Yeah, and systemic racism also affects the, you know, the quote unquote good cop, the guy who's just doing his job, right? If you're a guy
he gets a bad rep.
Job, not even his bad rep, right? So let's say I'm a guy just doing my job and I work on a police force, and this police force is implementing policies and or laws, or enforcing rather, not implementing, they're enforcing policies or laws that are intrinsically racist in some way, or they are disproportionately affecting people of a certain color, even if they weren't intended to be racist, right? And my job is to enforce this. I'm contributing to systemic racism, even if I am not a racist at this point, because now just by following the rules of my job to the letter, so I can do a good job, I'm implementing somebody else's and enforcing somebody else's racist policies. So even the, you know, the quote unquote good cops, if these systems themselves aren't rewritten to be more inclusive and more humane, you know, then those guys are doing as much damage as the assholes, because they're not even trying to do anything wrong. They're just following the law to the letter. And sometimes the letter is wrong. Like, think about how long slavery was legal. Legal does not mean just, okay? Yeah. Think about the fact that the Fair Housing Act was passed in 1968. Before 1968, it was legal to literally drag people of color out of their homes and just claim they didn't own them. There were actually charters in different communities where black people were not allowed to legally own homes. So the bank would sell you a house and then the cops could come drag you out of it. That ended in 1968. Like that, my grandma was still alive. My mom was still alive.
Lyndon B. Johnson thing you were talking about, which we can also get into more if you want to.
Yeah. I do kind of want to get into that more.
Okay. Do you want to talk more about the police first, or do you want to move into that?
Who, me?
Yeah.
We could move into that. I don't know. It's all good. It's all good. What do you want to talk about?
We want to answer your questions. So if you're not convinced that there's systemic racism in police, we can still talk about it.
I'm getting convinced.
And the other thing,
the big takeaway here is just like, don't think when people say systemic racism, we're talking about some cabal that involves every officer on the planet and they're all in cahoots. Like, oh, let's get them. Like, usually how this kind of stuff goes is like any job goes. Some guy writes a rule and everybody else just follows it and doesn't think about it.
The fact is, okay, so when we get into like all cops are bastards, I know you don't agree with that statement and I understand why. However, there is a culture among police officers, and even other police officers admit to, that if they do something wrong, they're really not held accountable for it. And the ones that do try to do the right thing are often ostracized on the force. Like, there's been articles written by people who are cops that are like, I experienced this firsthand where I was trying to hold my colleagues accountable for doing things that I thought were immoral, and I was demoted or sent into it, like transferred to a different, sector or something like that, because they don't want to be held accountable for those things. And because they like have so much power that they don't really need to have, or like there's nobody really keeping an eye on it, they get away with it. And that's more the issue. It's like, it's not so much like the specific number of times that police officers kill unarmed black men. It's whether or not they're held accountable for it, because they always should be held accountable for it. And most of the time they're not. And it's like, it's different if a black person kills another black person, that's bad, but black people are held accountable when that happens. And when a cop kills a black person, that's the government killing them and then getting away with it.
I'm surprised that cops aren't accountable for killing black people, because you think it gets so much attention in the news anytime anything.
Well, nowadays, it's getting worse nowadays, where people are really paying attention. But like 10 years ago, I don't really think this kind of thing really came up on the news as much. And like, there's so many examples of cops getting away.
That does bring up something that I want to address.
Sure.
Like, are we not concentrating on this happening so much more now that it's making it seem like it's happening a lot more than it actually is? You know, we're just picking out every instance where some asshole does something bad to somebody else that happens to be a different race than them. And we're blowing it up. We're putting it out there. And we don't show all the times when a Black person does something to a white person or Asian person, or, you know, like, we're only concentrating and making a huge, you know, and these news shows have even been fronted off for doing this with hidden camera stuff, admitting that they only put out videos that fit the narrative to basically manipulate the public into thinking things are a certain way, or things are worse, or white people are worse than Black people. They're manipulating us into believing that by having this selective bias. Did I make sense what I was trying to say?
Yeah, and the news does have an agenda, but what people miss with that is the news's agenda is a lot more impactful than just the media, because what the world sees is what the world votes on, to be frank with you.
I'm wondering if we can have some common ground on a couple of the other things that I have on my list over here.
Probably.
Probably. How do you feel about like woke white liberals that want to be allies to Black people? You know, I feel like a lot of time they're just using Black people for their own agenda, for their own, you know, they don't accept Black people for having different views. They only want the Black people to think exactly like them, to parrot their talking points. They don't want them to have their own minds. If they do, they kick them out, you know, they kick them out. They just want, they pretend to be Black allies so they can virtue signal. And, you know, you understand what I'm saying? Like,
I know you're talking about the kind of people who, like, when a Black person voices like conservative opinions or something, they call them racial slurs, like those kinds of white liberal allies.
You know what I'm trying to say then.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to clarify your point.
People are racist, like more racist than a lot of other people. You know, because they don't want people to be individuals.
See, I think that's what really all racism boils down to, is not valuing people as individuals. At a certain point, when somebody is far enough removed from you, you just start seeing them as the other. And I do think there are legitimate allies who are not people of color. There are legitimate, allies in this, battle for equality that are white, or if you're a woman, and you're battling for equality, there are legitimate male allies. But there are just as many people who are just knee-jerk reacting to things, and they're voicing opinions that are halfway rooted in fact and halfway just rooted in emotion. And those people are, like you said, they're virtual signaling. They're trying to make themselves feel better. We've often called it white savior complex. There are politicians who are using, that narrative of I'm an ally because they think it'll help their poll numbers. And then where I see things become a little bit more legitimate is when I see people who don't really stand to gain a whole lot from pushing this pro-Black narrative, if you will, right? Like, okay, if you're a white person and your stance is, oh, I feel like I should help these people because they don't enjoy, the same level of freedom that I do, right? Your goal should never be to get anything out of that other than a better world to live in. As soon as I see somebody
including public acclaim.
Including public acclaim, honestly. Like, the public acclaim should never be the goal. It's not, oh, I'm going to get famous because I helped those people. It should be, oh, those people are being mistreated. That should not be a thing. So when I see somebody in a position to profit from one of these issues, even Black people, honestly, when I see people in a position to profit from these issues, I immediately stop paying as much attention to their voice, because I know that their primary concern is going to be power. It's going to be profit. It's not actually going to be the cause. That's what happens when any cause gets co-opted.
Their goal is to divide people along racial lines for money, for power, for fame, and they're profiting from it. So I understand what you mean. Yeah, if you see somebody profiting from it, you have to really question their motives.
Yeah, but like on the same token, you also have to respect the general purpose camaraderie of, say, the white guy who's standing front row at the BLM protest and waiting for the tear gas to fall. Like that guy, he's really in the trenches. He's really putting in the legwork to like, yeah, getting maced in the face. Like if you're there, even if you do, harbor whatever ignorances you grew up with, at least, that seems to me like, oh, this isn't a decision you make because you're doing it for the clout, if you will. This is a decision you make because you actually want to be there and do something as opposed to nothing. And I'd say, those kind of people, the best outcome you could hope for with them would be, like the panderers, if you will. The best outcome you could hope for with them would be to actually convert them into actual active members of the community. Because at the end of the day, what these protests are their communities all getting up at once and saying, yeah, we're not going to deal with this. And communities don't just consist of Black people, Certain communities consist of more Black people, but like communities consist of different types of people in most states in this country. Milwaukee's kind of in a weird spot. Where I live, like, it's a little bit more segregated.
Yeah,
but most places you're not most places you're not going to find the kind of divides that we have here in Milwaukee unless you're in like the deep south. Most places a community is just people. So I feel like people of all races, creeds, and religions should like get up and say, hey, yeah, no, this shit will not stand. That's good. But the moment when a white person starts making money hand over fist for pandering, ideas to the Black voter or the average Black man, that just seems way sleazy to me. It's the same kind of sleaziness that like, religious leaders get into, like, oh, I'm going to sell you this because you're suffering and I know I can take advantage of you. Not because I care, but because you're suffering and I know that I can take you for all you've got right now.
So also what about like white people that, like James was mentioning a little while ago, what about the ones that feel like it's like they're able to call Black people, Uncle Toms or sellouts or whatever if they don't have the proper opinions? Does that make them racist?
I think this is really the only point in this video where I'm going to speak for the majority of Black people when I say those people need to shut the fuck up. Like, seriously. Okay, like, telling a Black person that they're a race traitor, they're an Uncle Tom, whatever. Okay, even amongst Black people, it's pretty controversial as to whether or not that should actually be behavior that we're partaking in. Like, that stuff came with us from the plantation, okay? Like, calling somebody, Mass's favorite, Uncle Tom, whatever. Those
or you want to be white. You're just trying to be white.
Yeah. Those are genuinely, I think, destructive terms in the Black community because they limit free thinking. They limit critical thinking. They suggest that if you have an idea that is too far out of the norm, that your Blackness will now come into question. And I think for a white person to try to partake in that discussion, to question the validity of a Black person's Blackness, if you will, because that's what it turns out, that's what it comes down to in the end.
Right.
I think that's just absurd. What right do you have? What makes you an expert on Blackness? Shut the fuck up, frankly.
Okay, look, there we have some common ground. That's what I was looking for.
As a white person, I would like to tell all other white people to not do that. It is literally never okay to use slurs against Black people for any reason, no matter what they think. So, if it's not okay when you're racist, it's not okay when you're pretending to not be racist as well.
When you're pretending to not be racist.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
So, how about this? Here's another thing that maybe we can, this might be a little spicy. I really don't know what Nick's opinion of this will be, but I know what Mimzi's opinion will be. I'll just mention an encounter I had on Twitter, which we all know Twitter is like the worst place on the fucking planet. Recently, that was interesting. On Twitter, I was having some sort of conversation that was somewhat political with people who are, I guess, more left than I am. And I don't even remember what the disagreement was. But at one point in the conversation, I said, this person was like, okay, I'm done talking about this. And I was like, okay, bye, sis. And she went off because she basically is accusing me of using Black slang against a Black person. I didn't even know she was Black, to be honest with you. But she basically got extremely angry at me for using a term that she feels is like belongs to the Black community. And that's one thing. In response to that, not, like the people who dogpiled me, many of them were white. Like one of them literally DM'd me and told me to kill myself and called me a fag because I am gay, and said that I should get subjected to a hate crime. And I'm like, so it's okay to be homophobic if you think that I used a form of like AAVE or what have you. Like, what's your opinion on that, Nicholas?
So I do definitely believe that there is a such thing as cultural appropriation, but a lot of people, people who tend to frequent Twitter and Tumblr specifically, but a lot of people tend to take it way too fucking far. So
what about fatherless homes in the Black community? Do y'all want to talk on that?
Yes.
Because I know, yeah, I bet you do. I think that you probably have to say on that. But I think that a lot of it has to do with the fact that we're pretty much incentivizing fatherless homes by offering welfare to people who don't have fathers in the homes. You know, it becomes financial, and you know, it becomes. I'm not as good as talking.
Okay, so I know what you're talking about, and I mean,
I want to be able to say this.
Okay, go ahead. I want to let you say it.
Writing and acting, but being a public speaker is not my strong suit. A lot of shit's going on up here. You know, there's not a problem up here. It's just getting it from here out to here. I have an actual issue with that, and it's kind of funny that I put myself in this position to be like part of a talk show or whatever.
You'll get better at it, but I
really
think you're okay.
I have a problem with speaking. I have
You have ADD.
Is that what it is?
Yeah. I think
Is
so.
it?
Yeah, maybe.
Because I'm dying to diagnose myself with something. Just
all
something.
right. Well, but yeah. So you want to talk about the
I want to talk about
thing you called it?
Talk about fatherless homes, and I think that the welfare system has hurt that. You know, the like the Great Society Act. I think that you did a little bit of research on that, James. Maybe you want to talk on that.
I'd love to.
But it's basically, yeah, like the welfare.
So here's the bottom line. It's a very simple answer to this issue. Welfare itself has been proven numerous times in many other countries and in America to improve the economy and people's poverty levels and to improve like systemic poverty issues as a whole. The problem is a specific act called the No Man in the House Act or something like that, I think, which was specifically rolled out at around that same time as the act you are talking about that I already forgot the name of, but the one that had a lot of welfare programs. A lot of states in opposition to this, because Lord forbid Black Americans have any progress in the country if you're racist and in the South, and it's the 60s. What they rolled out to counteract this are these laws where basically a social worker can go into your house at any point in time if you're on welfare, and if there's evidence that a man is there, they take your welfare away and you don't get it anymore. So that is what incentivizes.
That's what I'm talking about.
And I agree with you, but the problem isn't welfare. The problem is incentivizing, like, to take it away from people because they have a man in the house. Like, that's the problem. So like, you shouldn't be making people's livelihood dependent on that. You should just give it universally if you're gonna give it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I mean, the other thing is like, okay, so yes, is this an issue that exists in the Black community? Totally. But it's also an issue that's blown way out of proportion, because I think a lot of people assume that fatherless homes make up like a majority figure in the Black community, because about 70%. You
guys froze.
No, that's not at all true. That's the thing. So 2/3, or a little bit more than 2/3 actually, 70% of the Black community has children out of wedlock. They are non-marital relationships. But just because you're not married to the mother of your child does not mean you're required to be absent. But because these studies were initially conducted by the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, don't ask me why they're taking the census of our community, custody, but that's a whole nother discussion. They are reporting that because these men aren't married to the women having their children, that they're absentee fathers. And so you're getting skewed reporting because marriage is being used as a standard for being present, which is just completely unfair. I'm sure as a woman, you understand, like, your decisions being confined to marriage is not exactly an ethical way to go about anything. And
I didn't actually know that, so.
Yeah, that's what the figure is. It's 70% of Black men are not married to the women they have children.
Then the woman loses their welfare check.
Well, not anymore.
Well, yeah,
that act was repealed in the 90s during the Clinton administration. So it's funny because you can look, I found a chart while I was researching this, and I can show it to you later. But you can look at the chart of like basically fatherless homes or whatever, how much they increased at what points in time. So during that first act with the No Man in the House Act being in addition to those welfare acts, you do see, especially for the Black population, that number rise really quickly. And then in the 90s, when that act is repealed and completely, like, you can now have welfare even if you have a man in the house, like, that's legal. That line just goes like that.
That was repealed.
It
in the
is,
90s?
but. But what we're missing here is that there is still a great amount of incentive to not have the man in the home, especially if you're in a low-income family and you're living with the aid of government assistance. There is an incentive for that because, for starters, it is still judged based on, like, the household expenses, the income of a household and how many people live there. So let's say as a man, I have a child with somebody and I'm not married to them, and she's going to be the primary caretaker for the child because, I'm the strong back in this relationship. I work, let's just go with the old cliches. I know this isn't true of everybody, but let's go with the old cliches, right? That means I can get a welfare check now. Yeah, well, the traditional broken family, if you will. That means I can get a welfare check now because I'm not living in the home. So my household is considered a separate entity by my state and federal governments. She can get a welfare check. And then on top of that, there are still provisions in other programs besides just traditional welfare that do benefit single motherhood. Like, for example, energy assistance, I know. Yeah. WIC, you get more food stamps if you are a single mother taking care of children than if you are two parents taking care of children. You are given more food stamps. It means your kids can eat better. Okay. If you're a single mom and you're trying to keep the lights on in a big house with a lot of, modern luxuries in it, that costs money. Energy assistance actually pays out more to single mothers still, even though welfare doesn't. Like, there are a lot of government aided programs that do. So sometimes for low income people, whether it's a conscious decision or not, when you're crunching the numbers and trying to make your very slim budget stretch throughout the month, you realize, hey, if I don't marry this person, I get more free money. And that's still a thing.
Is there a solution to this? Okay.
I think the solution is one that's
my opinion.
Just UBI is the solution, right?
That's my opinion. And I'm sure Nick may disagree with me on this, and that's fine. But my opinion is I think welfare should be more universal.
My opinion is that if you intend for these people to stay on welfare, then yes, absolutely, make welfare more universal. But if we're looking for a long-term solution to this problem, we don't need to have large percentages of communities of color even be eligible for welfare. We need to fix the social and economic conditions that create the poverty welfare is meant to address to begin with. Welfare is not anybody's ideal situation. Welfare is something we did because poverty exists and we are trying not to have large populations starving in the streets. But if the average Black man and the average Black woman can make an honest living without the government's help more easily, then I think we'll see less of a need for welfare to begin with. So the conversation of welfare reform won't even be as necessary because it will affect a significantly smaller population.
So the solution would be to de-incentivize this. And
the solution would be to improve the infrastructure in Black neighborhoods.
Yeah, if you give parents an opportunity to give their children more that does not involve taking money out of the taxpayer's pocket, they will. If it is more beneficial to their child to go another route that doesn't involve welfare or energy assistance or any of those things because they can put more in front of their child in terms of opportunity and resources another way, I'm sure they're going to go with the way that guarantees their child the best life. That's just basic parental logic. Unless you are a shit parent, you go with the option that guarantees your child the best life. Right now, unfortunately, for a lot of low-income people, what we're seeing is that the system we have set up does not offer a lot of options that don't involve trying to get back on government assistance to give your kids an edge. And that's the job of a parent. We're making people act against their nature if we're asking them to not take welfare for their children.
Yeah. Okay, so kind of along the lines of what we're talking about, personal responsibility here, I also want to know if you think that the Black community should take any kind of personal responsibility, or if you might think that they have a culture problem. You know, that maybe some of the issues in the Black community can be solved by the Black community, that maybe they glorify drugs and sex and dealing, and they don't build up the value of going to college and being smart and doing good in school, that it's kind of looked down upon in the community. You know, that oh, you're just trying to be white, you're a geek, you're a dork, and then they build up the drug dealer, and those are the types of people that they look up to, and that's really not a good model for prosperity for the community.
Spicy question.
Get what I'm trying to say? Is that a good question?
I get exactly what you're trying to say. Let's get James's take on it before I completely blow this chat up, because I was about to say this question. I'm not gonna lie, I'm about to talk my shit, but let's see what James has to say first.
I didn't want to say anything because I feel like I don't have the experience necessary to speak on. Well, I have like a little bit of experience, but it still is a white person, so my take is going to be ignorant. Like, I'm just acknowledging that up front. When I was in school, I lived in Black neighborhoods and I went to Black schools because my family was poor. And I do think that there was that culture kind of glorified in like middle school and high school. And it was like, I guess like they see a lot of like, you know, really famous rappers that came from that background. And then that's why they admire it or feel like it's tough. I don't know how much that persists into adulthood though. And I don't know to what extent that is or what effect that has or how you feel about it. I was bullied in school a lot for like being a geek and stuff like that. And I had some alternative Black friends that were bullied for like acting white or whatever. So like, I get what Mimzi is getting at, but I guess I don't really know what my opinion is about it from there. So.
Yeah, I think the idea of this specific type of Black person who resents education is a pretty mainstream one, but really the issue is way more complicated than that. And it goes back to like the sentiment behind the saying, I'm trying to make a way out. Like you hear it a lot if you listen to any hip hop music from any generation. People talk about making it out of bad situations, making it out of the hood, and just making it out in general has become a thing. Oh, bro made it out. Like that's just an expression now. Because the situations we're born into often aren't ideal. To quote one of my favorite recording artists, his name is Denzel Curry. He literally had a song called Speedboat that contained the line, you either go to school, go to jail, or the army. Because if you grow up in a low income household, then your only options are educate yourself to the point where you can now be employed outside of your usual means and move up in the world that way. Do something illegal and take a risk that will get you more payout because it's illegal so you can change your situation, or enlist in the armed forces, hope you don't catch a bullet and then retire off that pension, because they're one of the few places you can still get a pension these days. But like those are really the options that are presented to us. You're either a, school nigga, you're a street nigga, or you're a soldier. That's what it is. Like, so what you'll see a lot is, especially depicted in the media, is Black people being made fun of for, being white or not involving themselves in the street life. And you won't really see a lot of representation for the people of color who enlist in the military unless you're watching a war movie, because usually by the time they're 18 and these discussions about college start, these guys are already on buses getting shipped off to basic training, But it's like, at the end of the day, it goes back to that core logic of, okay, what are people actually trying to do? They're trying to find a way out of their shitty situation. And the reason there's a stigma on people who take the school route being slow or like playing into the hand of white folks is because, by and large, most schools, like most banks, are run by white people. They have systems that have not altogether been sustainable or beneficial for the majority of Black people who run through them. Like you look at dropout rates right now, and it's clear that the way that schools are set up, they're not really agreeing with a lot of their students of
My school was
color.
fucking terrible, so.
They're non-English speaking students. They're students who are required to maintain full-time jobs while they're attending school. Like, there's all these different demographics where you look at them, and they're taking all the boxes for the Black community here, and they tend to perform poorly at traditional university. But this is still sold to us as like, oh, this is how you get up in the world. So it's kind of like, you ever have any friends who are Forex traders?
I don't have any friends. I thought we established that already.
Oh yeah, okay, we established. Well, you ever have any friends? Okay, in the past, you ever have any friends get involved in a pyramid scheme?
Yes.
Yeah.
They were always like the white Karen friends, though. You know what I mean? Like,
that is the skepticism that most Black people have towards education. At least as I understand it, is the ones who understand how unsuccessful that route tends to be on average are like, dude, why are you playing the lottery? Why are you working for Primerica or Mary Kay right now? Why are you joining this fucking scheme that's going to leave you tapped out and broke at the end of it, assuming you're not like one of the cream of the crop who happens to come out ahead, when you can come out here and get fronted by the plug and make $100K in a month.
I get what you're saying.
Like,
I mean, and the
drug
truth is, I think the school
glorified
system is pretty corrupt. So yeah.
No, but she asked me why does the drug dealer get glorified, right? The drug dealer gets glorified because the drug dealer has money. The drug dealer has money in one of the brokest populations this country has. The drug dealer turns around and turns into a legitimate businessman. Look at Jay-Z, came up selling crack, was open about that after the statute of limitations on all of the drugs he sold was up and he couldn't be arrested for it anymore. He's told the story about how selling records is just like it was when he was selling crack. He's been open about this, right? And he invested all his dope money into things like Tidal. If you know anyone who streams music on Tidal, congratulations. That was built on crack cocaine, you know?
So you think that's a good option for getting ahead, huh?
I don't think it's a good option, but I think when you're served a bad situation and you can turn the shit life feeds you into something legitimate and something productive, then you might as well. In communities that were intentionally built, and like, you know, some of the other things we'll cover get into that, but like they were intentionally built to be unprofitable on purpose. And now you're putting people in unprofitable situations in a halfway capitalist society that basically insists that you profit or starve. And what do you expect them to do but take the free money they're offered?
I pretty much completely agree with what you're saying, even though like I'm like a pro-welfare person. I do think ideally it would be great if we just had the infrastructure available to people to be able to make it on their own without needing government assistance. Yeah.
So it's like, I think that's the other thing is when you talk about the perception of like illegal, you know, businesses operating, particularly in Black communities. I call them illegal businesses because that's what they are. Once upon a time, it was considered a legitimate business model to do a lot of these things. And now they're operating the same types of businesses, but they're evading the law while they're doing it because these types of businesses have now been made illegal. Once upon a time, though, these were actual business models that some of the same people who enjoy generational wealth and power and, you know, places of privilege in this current institution, they came up off of these same methods that now we're condemning, you know, your neighborhood dealer for basically using their playbook a little bit late.
Yeah, it's like a pocket theory, basically.
Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting take on my question.
I mean, it's like,
it's
I know
this
truth,
is
kind of going off
like,
into some
context informs everything. It's the truth. Like when you look at what one person is doing in an isolated incident, it's easy to say, oh, well, that guy is bad because X, Y, and Z. But then when you look at like the history of a product or the history of an industry, and you notice that like, oh, this entire industry has kind of been shit from the beginning. This person's just participating in the shit. It's a little bit easier to understand where they're coming from, you know?
Well, especially with like weed, because like weed is already becoming legal in a lot of states or like decriminalized. And like, that is something that a lot of Black people have gone to jail over selling.
Yeah, and now there are literally white people opening legal marijuana dispensaries in other states because they have the capital to actually open these, you know, dispensaries up and pay growers and things like that. And it's like, okay, but what about my boy Maine who got locked up, like, you know, for literally having a zip on him? Like, okay, there's a whole criminal enterprise going in Colorado right now. Like, rewind a few years, that enterprise would have been criminal. But now that it's legal, oh, this guy's not a criminal. He's not a detriment to the community. He's a taxpayer. He's helping us. Like, okay.
It benefited Colorado.
You can't tax the hood. You can't just tax the hood, please. You know
Yeah,
what
I'm sure you
saying?
guys would rather be taxed than go to prison.
Man, I can't say too much, but let's just say I have met some people in my lifetime who would definitely be a net benefit to the community if they were allowed to pay taxes.
And something I just wanted to say here about America being a racist country. Do you agree,
Oh,
Nick,
yeah.
that America's a racist country?
Duh.
Okay, so I mean, well, not duh, like, but
Nah, I'm
if
gonna be honest. That's kind of
wrong,
a dumb moment. We still live in an era where we
you
are
could say that
debating.
America, there's racism in America, or racism exists in America without saying that America is a racist country. But
There are literally monuments to slavers that we are still debating. Should we take down the monuments to slavers? Yes, this is a racist country. This is at least 50% a racist country if we're still having this argument.
Why are
Yes.
people dying to come in here? I mean, they will literally risk their lives to come here illegally or any way they.
But one guy's gear is 1 to 2 points lower than the other guy's gear in terms of the actual statistics. But on the surface, they look like they're wearing the same gear, right? And you put two guys in front of the screen and you give both guys a controller and you're like, okay, pick your fighter, right? One guy doesn't know he's playing at a 2 to 3 point disadvantage on all of his pieces of equipment. He might not know that he's losing this game because of calculable, empirical facts. He might think he's just less good at the game. And that's what's happening to minorities in this country is they're coming in and, okay, yes, we are making great strides over the centuries to make this country more of an equal place. We're definitely not the place where only white landowners can vote anymore. I'll give you that, right? We've come a long way. So a lot of people are played into accepting this image of equality because it looks like we're all starting the game with the same equipment, not knowing that certain people start the game with a stat buff, if you will. They start the game with a leg up. And so people are coming to this country expecting, America, the land of the free, the land of the industrious, the land of the rich, frankly. Like, there used to be legends about this place where they would say our streets were paved with gold. And I'm sure expectations have been tempered over the years. But when you start it paved with gold and you temper expectations, you still get a place that sounds a lot better on paper than a lot of the world. So you're asking why people are coming here for a notoriously racist country? It's because they're weighing things out. Okay, racism exists globally. Oppression exists globally. Stupid politicians exist globally, and they always will. But if I'm playing my life out and I'm thinking, okay, where do I have the best chance of coming up in the world? A lot of people look at America and they say, okay, I might play that game. Looks like I might profit.
A lot of immigrants do really well. I mean, Nigerian immigrants are one of the populations that do the best here in America, and they have a very dark skin color. I mean, how do we justify
They're also
that?
not affected by the same generational issues as African Americans, that are.
Yeah, skin color has nothing to do with intelligence or industriousness. What has an impact on that is the fact that, it used to be, okay, so it used to be illegal in this country for a person brought here and enslaved to learn to read, for example, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So if I can't learn to read, that's going to set me at a disadvantage no matter what realm of industry I try to get into, other than agriculture. I can farm. That's about all I'm good for at that point, right? Meanwhile, you look at people who are native to Nigeria, and whatever the standard of education may be over there, it was never illegal in Nigeria for a Nigerian man to learn to read, okay? They've got generations of literacy, generations of culture that have been passed down, generations of information that was very much lost in the transatlantic slave trade when a lot of my ancestors and most Black Americans' ancestors were brought here as part of a captive workforce. We were not taught, we were not allowed to retain any of the things we had been taught in our mother countries. We were stripped of all information and told to start from square zero. And we only just started coming back from square zero about a century and a half ago in terms of information being amassed by our community. Then you look at a Nigerian, you look at an immigrant from Ghana or whatever, okay, yeah, it's not America. They don't have our westernized standard of education, but they still have standards that the people are allowed to live humanely there. They're allowed to progress. They're allowed to pass things down from generation to generation and prepare their children for a life where they're going to be doing something more than running from slave catchers. We had to start from square zero here in this country. They didn't.
Also,
that's why.
Multiple times Black people have had to start from square zero because, and this is, like I said, I wanted to talk about the Tulsa race riots and other such related incidents. During the 20s, not just Tulsa, but multiple other cities and neighborhoods were violently, brutally massacred by white racist people because they were black neighborhoods that were doing well. So like Nick calls it Black Wall Street, things like that, like where black people had actually managed to settle themselves and amass some wealth and some power and like, you know, be situated somewhere and like start to live comfortably. And then these neighborhoods are just razed to the ground. Like I've been to Tulsa. It still has the same negative impacts from that happening. You can still see it today. And that has taken, like, basically they just have to like start over rebuilding their neighborhood at that point. And that wasn't that long ago, you know?
Yeah.
Less than a century. Well, actually at this point now, exactly a century. So,
and I mean, the thing about Tulsa too is like, if you look at Tulsa and you look at a handful of like other really big race riots, they happened in communities of color where people were starting to amass certain knowledge, particularly in the financial field. And these places were starting to be referred to as potential like viable Black Wall Streets. Back when the world was still segregated, the idea of, you know, both races having their own version of something, their own version of a water fountain, their own version of a bathroom, you know, quality discrepancy aside, like, you know, every race was supposed to have their own version of something. That was the pitch, right? So black people tried to have their own versions of, you know, cities of industry. And those were the cities that were disproportionately targeted by the racists who were active, who were violent, and who did have the power to get away with that stuff in the eyes of the law back then. So even any attempts we made to, like I've been saying before, come back from square zero, like he said, they basically said, no, you're not allowed to move from square zero. We won't accept this. Because, and this is a conversation me and James have had on a few occasions, be it via American capitalism or by subverting American capitalism, it seems like racists have always been scared of the people that they have oppressed in the past learning how to play their game, because
which is
learning
understandable
how to play the game means we can win the game.
I mean, that's pretty much like all my opinion as well. So
yeah,
there was a I think it was like an anarchist sort of libertarian compound that was like, it was a black community, and it was like they kind of made their own sort of, like I said, like their own compound, their own neighborhood, where they wanted to like have a bit more of like a small government, probably something that would kind of appeal to you, Mimzi. They literally got bombed by the US like National Guard essentially during like a conflict with the police around that area because of racism. And it was again during that sort of time period, like I think it was a bit after the 20s, but it was still like in that series of decades. And they destroyed that neighborhood, and then the bombs like set fire to a fuck ton of buildings in that area, just the surrounding area, and all of those people became homeless, and they're all black people because it's a black neighborhood. So things like that happened more than once. Like at least like I can think of like 3 examples offhand. I'm sure there are probably more than that. So it's like when you start realizing that these neighborhoods have had to be set back over and over again already, that's why they start from a disadvantaged point, whereas a Nigerian person does not. Because I know people have this sort of image of like Africa just all being like, you know, savagery and like a savannah with like just lions eating people or what. I don't know what people really picture anymore, but they actually like have civilized societies and cities that are big, and they have like, you know, they have, you know, big schools and big hospitals and like all that shit, right? So
oh yeah, you talk about like Nigeria. Like Nigeria is a place where you'll find cities that will rival American big cities, and they have infrastructure, they have schooling in place there, they have. And because you're in Nigeria and there's a lot more people of color too, they also don't have the systemic barriers in their infrastructure that we have here in America that were designed to prevent slaves from moving up and becoming legitimate human beings.
Well, why in the world would they want to come to America then? It doesn't sound half bad over there in Nigeria.
Because America has been, for the longest, just like a great example of some of the worst characteristics of human greed, and we hoard resources like a motherfucker. We even go to great lengths to try to immigrate people from other countries here who we feel might be good human resources, and that's always been a thing in this nation. So when you look at like say American universities, particularly the private universities that have also been able to receive government funding, that's where you'll find like a lot of the better professors are at, or a lot of the better like accredited programs if you want to get a good job in certain fields. I actually I dated this chick back in college who she didn't live in the country. She was an exchange student when we met, and we actually spent a lot of our time talking long distance. And her plan was eventually to finish college in her country, specifically so she could come back to America, finish her graduate program here, and then go back to her country and earn more money because she has an American degree and is considered more valuable there. She didn't want to stay here. She just wanted to come here for some of that good old-fashioned American opportunity and then leave to cash a bigger check. And I feel like that's a lot of people's experience. Like I met people from Nigeria and Ghana, or whose families had traveled there and from there. And it's like either A, they're coming here to set down roots and, go into some particular industry where they feel like they'll be successful here, or they're coming to get some kind of American credentials to take to other parts of the world and show off, because the American dollar is the reserve currency of the world. American credentials mean something to the rest of the world. Like, we built ourselves up as the greatest nation ever. And even if people who live here resent this place for a lot of good reasons, we still have that reputation. That reputation is something you can sell, and you can sell it to benefit your life. So of course they're coming here. Duh.
Chinese people exploit that credential like all the time, but like they like hire people who like are American to like promote their businesses because it like is more appealing in that way. And my biggest thing on that point is, even if we accept that there are a lot of people that want to immigrate here, that does not mean that America is immune from criticism and that this problem doesn't exist.
Yeah, there's good reasons to want to go to a bad place.
Sure.
Okay.
And like, we obviously don't hate America. I love America. Like, that's why I want my country to be as good as it possibly can be, And I feel like this would be the next step to doing that. So
personally, I'd say love is a strong word for me, but I live in America.
Sure.
I have a me and my family exist here kind of commitment to making this place better. Definitely, from what I know about other nations, would not be my first choice, despite the land of opportunity sales pitch. But yeah.
To be fair, I would move to Scandinavia in a heartbeat if I could. So,
Yeah.
So I wanted to explain a couple of ways in which, like, when I keep saying that Black people are starting from a disadvantage, why that is specifically, because I know specifics like to make a difference and they're helpful to know. So, for example, there have been multiple studies that have been done when it comes to the things that I focus on are housing and employment, because those are two very important things for getting out of poverty, right? If you own a house, like, it's so much easier to like start a family with like a legacy, you know what I mean? So housing and then employment, obviously you need a job to make money. So there have been studies done that have proven time and time again over the past like several decades that people who are applying for houses or jobs with a Black sounding name are less likely to get hired or accepted, even if they have the exact same credentials or the same kind of background. So it's just this bias that people have, and it's not something that people are like consciously aware of and like maybe consciously racist, but they see these neighborhoods that are in poverty and associate these things with those neighborhoods, and so they associate it with crime and drug addiction and negative things like that. But those things again are a symptom of the poverty that they were already subjected to from the slavery issues that have persisted. So because of that, you have like basically for every applicant for like they were running specific numbers on this particular experiment, I guess. They had a bunch of white people apply and a bunch of Black people apply to these different jobs, and 15% of the white people got callbacks and 10% of the Black people got callbacks, and they made sure to like have controls where they accounted for like having similar backgrounds and similar education levels. And really the only difference is that their names like were specifically Black names, because they selected people with names that sound Black as opposed to people with names that sound white, and that was pretty much the only difference consistently. Same thing when it comes to housing. There's a video that was floating around a while ago, but I don't know where it is. I wanted to show it to you, but it's gone from the internet somewhere, where basically this group was calling a particular real estate company to ask about housing in a specific neighborhood that was more affluent, and they called them multiple times with different accents essentially, and every time they called they said they didn't have anything available until they called with just like a regular Midwestern white person accent, and then suddenly they did. So there are a lot of things like that where there's just like, it may not be legal to discriminate, but how are you going to prove that that's what happened? Like, how are you going to prove that the reason why this guy didn't hire you is because you're Black? Like, you can't really do that.
How are you going to control for that? you can't really enforce.
Well, the way that we enforce it isn't through like legal action, it's through cultural awareness that these things are issues. And I think a lot of employers probably don't even realize that they're doing it. I know some do, but I do think that there is a problem. And I feel like this is something that I've come to learn about myself as well. Because like I said, I didn't used to think that like Black people were oppressed either. I thought, oh, surely this stuff is all over. I feel like a lot of white people are ignorant to these things and they don't really see them when they happen, and making them aware of it is helpful for that reason. I don't think you have to do it aggressively, like, you know, in the way that we kind of criticize certain people from doing it. But I think having conversations about it, like candidly, and educating people on these issues is good. And that is part of why, because it's like, you know, I've probably had some kind of bias at some point in my life towards something that I perceived as like, oh, that's probably going to be kind of ghetto and maybe it'll be like, you know, bad. You know, like I'm sure I've been in that situation and I don't want to be like that. Like, as I grew up in these neighborhoods and a lot of my friends were, you know, Black people from these neighborhoods, and like, you know, that's shitty. So there was another study that was actually kind of interesting too, and this is about the courtroom bias that I keep talking about as well. Where they performed like a psychological study on white people. They had a group of white people that were racist, like they like kind of were self-admitted racist, and then another group that was like generally normal, like not racist. If they had any racism, it would be subconscious bias. And so they found that when they would have like a white defendant and a Black defendant, and it was basically the same crime, and the jury, you know, they had some white people and some Black people in the jury, and the racist would unsurprisingly usually say that the Black person was guilty and the white person was innocent. That statistic was really skewed, not surprising. And for the people who were just like regular white people who were not specifically racist, it was much more even, unless they had the Black jury members vote to incarcerate the Black person, and then those people also would vote more in favor of putting the Black person in jail in that situation. And the reason is because they now feel like, oh, I can't be racist because a Black person pointed it out first. So it's not me.
Oh yeah,
racist.
the good old my friends are Black. I have a pass. That mentality, it's so flawed and frustrating. But like,
and that's kind of like a
Black person gave me a pass thing. Just never dies.
Yeah, and I try to be really aware of that with myself as well, because like I said, like I do have Black friends, so I don't want to use them as an excuse to do anything that's wrong. And so basically the point that I'm getting at is that those people, they didn't think they were racist because they assumed that because a Black person said that this person is guilty, then it's okay if they say that they're guilty, even if they are taking into account the details of this case and it's no different than this white person that they said was innocent. So people are not aware of their biases consciously, you know, and that's why we have to have these conversations. It's not just to like, like I said, I don't think we should be attacking people all the time and calling all white people racist, but like, you know, let them know like that these things are actually happening, because we don't have that experience. We don't know about it unless we're told about it from Black people who have had these experiences, you know?
Well, I feel like I understand a lot better now, and I actually feel humbled by this experience. So I guess that was the goal, right?
I really appreciate you listening about it and stuff like that. Like, I don't think, like I said, I don't think you're racist, but I do think that you've been fed lies by your party that has racist roots, and they know it. But they don't want you guys to know, because they don't want you guys to associate yourselves with being racist, obviously, because then you're not going to vote for them. So to me, this is just more of me dispelling what I feel is political manipulation. So
you're going to cause me to not be a conservative anymore after a while.
I just want you to be progressive. I don't care what you call yourself after that. You could be conservative, progressive, liberal, progressive. So Mimzi's pretty much exhausted on topics. Like, I have a couple more that are like really minor, but we don't have to get into them. But if Nick has any other,
I don't want you to leave this thinking that you didn't get a chance to say everything.
Okay. So I mean, those were the inherent disadvantages that I keep talking about. One other thing that I guess just want to touch on is to put into perspective a little bit. While the majority of white people back during the slave times didn't own slaves, like about 1% did. And those families benefited a lot with wealth and power, and wealth and power goes a really long way for a really long time. And so generationally, these families continue to have wealth and power and influence, even when they don't own slaves anymore, because they already had that foundation to start from where they already have money in their family. Mitch McConnell is a good example of somebody who has privileged and benefited from coming from a family that used to own slaves. And he's probably not the only one, because 1% kind of sounds like a really familiar number, if you know what I'm getting at.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like a familiar number. But the other thing to remember is like, okay, so the entire Caucasian population of this country did not own slaves. Cool.
Right.
How many of them bought goods that were either directly manufactured by an enslaved workforce, or the raw materials for said goods were acquired by an enslaved workforce? Okay, how many of them benefited from living in buildings where unsafe construction jobs, where inadequate technology was present, were given to people of color who, they didn't care if we dropped you off of some scaffolding. Nobody's going to miss you. Like, how many people's lives who, you know, white people who did not have the funds to own slaves still benefited from the practice of slavery? Because that's the actual figure for how many of them would have fought for the continued practice of this, you know, this unjust servitude.
That's not even what I was getting at, but I do agree with that also. Like, there is a lot more of like a tangential, like, multiple steps process where people benefit from things like slavery or even sweatshops in the modern age and whatnot. But all I'm saying is those families that had that wealth and that power back then still have it today, whereas the Black families who obviously had to dig themselves up from nothing and then again have their neighborhoods bombed and then start all over again, they don't have that benefit. But even though it's a small percentage of the population that is like the elite super wealthy, those are the people that have power in the country, and they come from racist backgrounds. Whether or not they are connected to that personally, although some of them are, they're the ones that are making the policies in this country. So they have the ability to make policies that disadvantage people of color and Black people. I don't really like saying people of color, but disadvantage like any non-white demographic or any demographic that they don't like, because they have the money and the power and the influence to do that. And that's where their origins are a lot of the time. Not all of the time. Some of them are from other families that are immigrated here. But like, I mean, the families that had that influence back then continued to have it for decades, probably still do. So those are the people, I just want people to be aware, those are the people making these policies a lot of the time, or like at least they made them, you know, during previous decades, and we still have these policies. And that's why these policies, even though they don't seem racist, are, you know, rooted in racism. And so that's why they disproportionately affect Black people, because it's strategic and they knew what they were doing. Like, they knew who they were targeting.
Yeah, and again, back to like the whole like metaphor of like stats, even if things are just ever so slightly unfair, it makes it a lot easier for people to play off as, well, okay, life's not fair, and there's still ways around that when you're looking at one issue in isolation. Like, for example, when you look
That's always been my position, actually, what you just described there. Well, life's not fair, and there's ways around that, you know?
Let's talk about that.
But what ends up happening typically is the way certain things are implemented is specifically designed to deprive certain groups of people of the ways around that. So like you look at the welfare situation where it was like there was obviously an intentional concerted effort to remove fathers from the home at one point. That was only recently made illegal in the 90s. We covered this, right? Then you look at the redlining situation with housing, and we were just talking about job and housing discrimination, how like Black people were less likely to get approved for employment and housing. Now, that doesn't mean they couldn't get approved, but they were less likely. So again, it's a slight more degree of unfairness there. Then we talk about education. And if we really want to get into it, we can talk about how the wealthiest schools receive about 90% of the federal education funding that exists. And on the state level, it's even worse. It's about 95% goes to the wealthiest schools. Which means now, yeah, it's a disgusting level of disparity. So now we're talking about poor standards of education. We're talking about poor likelihood of finding legitimate housing or employment. We're talking about a variety of cultural stigma that may or may not be alive depending on the non-Black person you meet and how they're feeling on that given day. And
also what neighborhood and what state you're living in.
And then we're talking about things like the war on drugs existing when it's common knowledge that the U.S. Government is responsible for things like crack cocaine flooding the streets. So it's like, okay, you literally flood streets with fast, dangerous money in black markets and take away most of their legitimate options by sending people on a system where they keep getting railroaded by, okay, well, that kind of sucks, but I guess I'll go around it this way. Eventually, you stop finding ways to go around things. You run out of ways to get around. That's what happens. And that's where real evil thrives, is where you can explain it away as, well, okay, that kind of sucks, but it seems like life. And eventually it just seems like life over and over until you're like, oh, how did this person turn into a hardened criminal? I have no idea. Maybe they couldn't meet. You ever think about that?
Yeah, well, that's pretty much my position as well. And the school thing, like I said, I went to like a mostly black school. It was awful. Like there were no extracurricular programs. Like the education curriculum was really bad. Like the testing standards were terrible. Like, yeah, that's the thing. Like the teachers were trying their fucking best. Like they were trying their best. Like they were working with what they had, which was not a lot. And I dropped out of high school because that's how bad it was. Like that affected my, and again, like, I mean, I'm a white person. Like, I just had to deal with this because I was in that neighborhood, or, you know, I didn't have any better school options. Like for black people, it's that plus all these other issues that I don't have to deal with, because if I apply for a job, I can make myself look like a professional white person and probably have a better chance than someone whose name is like, you know, Keisha or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm. And the thing is, like, we always want to believe in this, like, this work wins mentality. The pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You know, if you work hard enough, you can get around anything. Life is going to suck sometimes. We've all come to accept that as a given.
Don't you believe that?
Not in the slightest, no. I believe that's how it should be, but I believe that people who have secured wealth and power have done everything in their power to unfairly skew the world in such a way that work no longer wins. It's who you know.
That's completely my position. Yeah, I mean, honestly, like you and I agree on this a lot more than I expected us to, because I think I figured economically we were like on different ends of the spectrum. But I mean, I completely agree with you.
We are on different ends of the spectrum, but my ideal world is a world where people, you know, via private ownership of themselves and their things, are given the fair ability to go out and work for something to be theirs. I believe strongly that that is the world that I would like to live in. But that's not the world that I do live in. That's not the world I was born into. When I'm born into subpar education and food stamps, and, you know, the only people I see around me with large quantities of money are the ones breaking the law, I'm born into a set of expectations, is what it is. I'm born into a pattern that I can either choose actively to break, or I can do what most human beings do, and I can go with the pattern. Because the thing is, like, we all love a good underdog story. We all love the guy who starts down and ends up. It's inspiring. It's, you know, the story of the great American captains of industry, if you will, is always like, oh, this guy was broke and he came here with pennies in his pocket and he started this big.
But you don't hear about the times that it doesn't work.
Yeah, you don't hear about the times it doesn't work. You don't hear about the majority of people who just do what the other people around them do to get by, because that's how people are. We like to take these, you know, one-off underdog stories and believe everyone can be that. Everyone can't be that. I'm just now going into my second year of self-employment, owning my own business. And I know that even I couldn't have been this a few years ago. Like, this took struggle, this took being in the right place at the right times, level luck, this took commitment, this took sleepless nights, and some people just want to live. And I don't think people who just want to live should be penalized ever for not excelling beyond, you know, whatever ankle weights life is forcing them to wear just so they can run.
Okay, Rock Lee.
Hey, that's the truth.
No, I agree with you. I 100% agree with that.
Yeah, you sound just like James right now.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I agree with everything you're saying. Like, you know, like I said, I know that we disagree on maybe some solutions economically, but like overall, we both, I think, see the same issues, and we both want the same outcomes. Obviously, we want people to be happy and things to be fair. Another thing that I think to bring up.
Say that just we think those things. I'm sure.
Oh yeah, no, I think most people.
Things I'm saying right now, she's probably agreeing with them, because like this is the way sane people want the world to work. Like, oh, you have a fair chance to do, reasonably expected human things and have a reasonable human life because you did said things. Like, no one wants to promote laziness. No one wants to promote theft. No one wants to promote murder. We all want the same thing. It's just we disagree about how we're going to get there. And the reason conversations like this are important is because a lot of us disagree about where we're starting from to begin with. Like, her version of the world has racism ending around the 1970s. Mine sure as hell doesn't. So if we can't even agree on where we're starting from, it's a lot harder to get people to see, oh, we're all trying to go in a similar direction, with the exception of a handful of douchebags.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, James, you had one more topic that you wanted to discuss?
The only other thing that I didn't get to mention is how, and this is another sort of capitalist critique, but Black neighborhoods also have been subjected to a lot more pollution and like toxic poisoning than white neighborhoods are, because kind of like you were saying with the scaffolding, doesn't
poor
matter.
Neighborhoods, basically. Poor neighborhoods.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, poor neighborhoods that are mostly Black neighborhoods because of systemic poverty issues with Black communities. And because of that, that also gives them more disadvantages than we're even counting in all of these things like education and employment and all that stuff, because these people are even dealing with poisons that cause health issues in the long run. They're real subtle, but then 20 years later you start developing chronic health issues and you don't know why, and then now suddenly you have a fuck ton of medical bills and you have much less energy than you should and all kinds of other resulting problems. That is the reason why you see so many people in Black neighborhoods or in poor neighborhoods, or however you want to phrase it, that need welfare or that have a hard time working as hard as the general population does, or keeping up, or even if they do work as hard or harder, they still have mountains of medical bills that they have to pay for, things like that. So there's just
if you want to talk about polluting the Black community and making medical bills go up, how would you talk about the average grocery store in the hood versus your average grocery store in Menominee Falls? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
This is a thing in more segregated areas, and I'm not sure exactly
it may not,
part of the but here
San Antonio,
in Wisconsin,
right?
Yeah,
we have a lot of segregation, and if I go to my grocery store in this kind of richer neighborhood that I live in now, the food there, the health quality is drastically different from whenever I used to live in. And
I'm sure your organics aisle is way bigger than the one you were used to in your old neighborhood, right? The amount of natural, organic, deli fresh food that you can get versus the prepackaged, over processed stuff. It's just ridiculous, how skewed that is. But it's because
it's not profitable to put a grocery store in a poor neighborhood. That's part of it.
Not even just that. It's that this the standard has been set that a certain type of customer, usually a Black customer, is going to go for the cheaper, fattier food, because that's just the sales precedent that's been set by only offering low quality food to the Black community since they were emancipated. Think about where fried chicken came from, right? Poultry is notoriously germ-ridden. A lot of health issues are associated with mishandling poultry in the kitchen. So oftentimes back, in the pre-antibiotic days, white folks didn't want to eat chickens they had on their farms. They kept those things for eggs, and then when they were slaughtered, they were used to feed the enslaved, along with cornmeal and pig intestines and all this other. Yeah, exactly, and all
that soul
stuff.
food. That's
we figured out how to make it taste better, but it was thrown at us because it was the lower quality food. So they literally we were raised on the cheap, low quality, shit of life food, cornmeal and meat nobody else wanted because it was bad cuts or, considered a dirty animal. And now we've got entire communities who have been raised on this. So that's what they buy at the grocery store. So now the sales data says, oh, they're buying more of this stuff. Feed them more of it. And we don't even have options for health food. I have to drive out of my community if I want to go hit a Whole Foods today. That's a thing.
Yeah. So when I lived in that neighborhood, I don't know if you've ever seen, maybe you have seen this kind of thing that that we're describing, but the only grocery store that was anywhere within a normal radius of where I lived had just nothing. They had nothing except, you said, processed frozen food, and they had old meat that I know was bad and was like terrible cuts. And like I tried so hard. Like I remember living there and I was like, I don't know how to fucking make food that I can eat here because like there's nothing healthy here at all. And like, I had never really come from like I grew up poor, so it's not like I had like a great nutritional background, but like as an adult on my own for the first time, like I wanted to be able to take care of myself. And I remember that I bought like some catfish from this place and I tried my best to like fry it and make it good, and it was like full of bones and it was like old and it like didn't make me feel great. And like that was the only grocery store in that neighborhood. And like if you don't have a car, which again a lot of Black communities, that's a big issue, and they have to rely on public transportation.
Back to the guy, honestly, GameStop, hop on the bus.
Right. And honestly, public transportation is good for a number of other reasons environmentally as well. But anyway, point being, like GameStop bus guy, they can't drive to Whole Foods. They can't drive to the Metro Market. They have to go to this store, and that's all they get. That's their choice of food. So yeah, that's a huge problem as well, for sure. And like we hope that like having discussions about these kinds of things at least makes some kind of a difference, and maybe over time it will, but it is going to take time to get to that point, and we can't just like do nothing during that period of time either, So that's how I see it.
I hope that I add something to the conversation. Just by
you're asking the questions. Yeah, you're asking the questions. You're representing the other side. Right.
I'm just trying to, I don't know, give a vehicle for other people to be able to say things that I don't know. I know that y'all have a lot more. Y'all have a lot more knowledge about a lot of things, and if I can help to give a platform to that, if I can help you to represent that, then I guess that I feel like I've done my part.
You have. I know you
definitely have. And like as I said before, I don't know is valid. I don't know is important. I think the reason I respect James more than I do my average, encounter with somebody on the far left is because James has taught me things before, and he's engaged in discourse with me where it felt like, oh, I might not have came at it from that angle. I didn't know that. Now I do. Like,
I feel the same way.
People are afraid to say I don't know, but there is power in I don't know. When you can accept what you don't know, then you can accept where you have room to learn, and there's power in that. A lot of people forget that. A lot of people think I don't know is a useless take. It's not. I don't know is important. In fact, the more people get comfortable with saying I don't know, I think the faster we'll be able to fix this world we live in, because a lot of the problems we face are because people want to act like they know and they don't know. Look at Trump's entire presidency. That was a guy acting like he knew what he was talking about, when you could tell, I don't care what side of the aisle you were on, even Republicans said, dude, that guy is stupid half the time, because you could tell he just didn't know what he was talking about. So he was just running his mouth.
He would just like say things like, and I told you this, Mimzi, like this is my opinion of him. Like he just like says shit. Like it doesn't matter how far away it is from the truth. Like if it sounds good and it's just in the moment, he just, whatever this, like, that's how I see Trump, and I agree. I think that's how a lot of people see him.
He never allowed himself time to not know anything and be educated by anyone else. Even when he was discussing,
he always has to have the answer.
Yeah, even when he was discussing a virus with like one of the most prominent doctors in the world, he never gave himself time to say, "Oh, I don't know. Maybe I should listen to the doctor." People don't respect I don't know as a position, but I don't know is valid. I don't know is real. And if we act like it doesn't exist, then nothing ever gets fixed, because we end up with a bunch of people who don't know acting like they do know. And it's unfortunate.
Well, I feel like I'm at a huge disadvantage here, because just the way I live my life, my whole lifestyle, like I've really been out of the loop, so to speak.
And you are a bit disadvantaged, and part of this whole thing is we need to make up those disadvantages and give people opportunities that they didn't have, right? So it's important.
I never took the time to pretty much learn anything that wasn't right in front of my face.
Most people don't.
Yeah.
Most people are not like avid bookworms. Like, oh, let me just pick up something on ethics and, racial tension today. Like most people don't do that for fun. Like there's a certain kind of person who gets
into that for a while.
For recreation. Okay. The majority of people learn things that are right in front of them.
Is that what you two do for recreation? Is that why
now I read things like that a lot. It does genuinely interest me now that I've started to learn more things, like over the past several years. Like I started reading way more things about this stuff. That's why I know all this stuff. But like 5 years ago, I didn't know half the shit I just told you, because I didn't really think about it. you know, like it wasn't. This is why, like, even though, you know, I like I said, I do get really frustrated by like overly woke like social justice wars and stuff like that. But when people on that side of the conversation, or when Black people have taken the time to say these things to me in like a way where they're not like being hostile or, you know, calling me a fag for saying cis, when they talk to me about it and I hear their point of view and I start to see like I maybe didn't know these things, like that's when I start to get interested in. That's when I start to like, I want to go read about this. I want to see if what they just told me was true, and then I find all kinds of other information. But you know, you also have to be careful about your sources, obviously. Like,
so yeah, I pretty much went from not knowing anything to watching a lot of Fox News.
Yeah, that's the downfall. But
yeah, that obviously explains so much right now, like so much.
I already know this about Mimzi, so like I already know the background that she comes from, and it makes sense to me.
Do you know anything about me, Nick? Have you seen any of my videos or anything?
No, he hasn't.
I haven't yet, but I'd definitely be interested in checking out some of your content, honestly. And no, I totally get where you're coming from, though. Hilariously, my introduction to politics was my family are heavy MSNBC watchers.
Which is the other side of the spectrum.
Yeah, the exact opposite of Fox News is basically the left-wing Fox. Like, if you want misinformation from the left, go to MSNBC and don't fact-check anything they say. You'll get it. Yeah. But I've never been super good at conversations with people, but I've always had a fairly good bullshit detector. So I really got into reading about this kind of stuff since you asked, is that what you do? Yeah, that's what I did in college a lot. Less so into my adult life, but definitely in college a ton, because we'd be having these discussions, and I'm old enough to be part of these discussions now, and I just hear them regurgitating things from the TV where it's like, okay, a little bit of basic Googling, and I realized TV wasn't right. And that just made me wonder, what else wasn't right? If the TV is not right, maybe my teacher wasn't all the way right either. I mean, a lot of the things they showed me in the classroom were on the TV or on the PowerPoint presentation. It's really easy to put wrong stuff on the screen in front of somebody and say this and just expect them to believe it.
But again, most people are followers and not leaders.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody thinks they like question things constantly. That takes effort. That takes work. We're effort antithetical as humans. We don't want to participate in anything that requires too much effort. But it's like, I started realizing when I started questioning what my family was telling me that came out of the TV, that's when I started learning more. And honestly, Fox News might be a good place for you to begin your education. Just take something that you believe strongly in and like try to find the opposite of it and go do a little bit of reading. Like I'm real heavy, like libertarian, bordering on like anarcho-capitalist kind of thinker, right? I have read Karl Marx for the simple fact that I know Karl Marx is basically the opposite of what I'm going for. And if I'm going to know why I believe what I believe, I should also know why people don't.
Yeah. By the way, Mimzi,
why people don't, I don't even have a real idea of why I do.
That's kind of what I do every time we have one of these conversations is I find what all of your side's arguments are, and then I just fact check all of them and I look them all up. And I'm not like saying like, I'm not trying to like confirm my bias or anything. I just want to know what the details are. And I might be wrong or right about some of them, but all I want to know is like, what is the other side? Why do they say this? And even on my side, when I have all of the things that like, I hear this as a talking point, what does the other side say about it? Like, what do the Fox News watchers say about this? Why is it that they don't agree with this or understand it? And then where is that misinformation coming from? That's how I do all of my research. And I kind of described this in our last episode as well. And I highly recommend it as like a more efficient way. You don't just have to like go try to find every book that might be on that topic or whatever. Like you can just
but just go look up something that disagrees with you. Intentionally read into the logic of people who disagree with you, because again, there is logic in the way people act. Whether or not you've been trained to accept their logic is another matter. But even the people who supported Trump, if you go and look at how Trump won their vote, there is a logic.
Well, she's one of them, so
yeah.
She knows.
Okay, so you understand this. There's a methodology to how like the Trump craze started. I would be, even as an opponent to Trump and his entire, regime, I would be an idiot if I tried to pretend that everyone who voted for him was just dumb and didn't see the light that I see, or some, stuck up.
Which a lot of people, unfortunately, have left. Say that shit.
A lot of people on the left and the right, they want to think like, oh, if you don't agree with me, it means you are stupid. You don't agree with the things I've been taught, which means you've been taught wrong. Right. Life is not so black and white. A lot of the action goes on in the gray areas.
You're like perfect for this show, by the way, honestly. Like everything you're saying is exactly like our values as a core principle that we want to facilitate these conversations for that exact reason and like challenge each other's opinions and learn things. So well said.
Appreciate you. That was actually me loosely quoting my big brother. That's something he always said is he doesn't deal in absolutes often because life does not happen in black and white. And a lot of it goes on in the gray areas. He was actually like one of the original musicians in my family, and he dropped an entire album with that premise called, I think it was Living in Grayscale or Life in Grayscale or something to that effect.
Nice. That's awesome. Like, I mean, I said almost exactly that on our last episode, the black and white thinking thing, like all of that. So
Yeah.
Yeah, it's too binary. It's too simple. Life doesn't work that way.
Exactly. And the same thing, like that's the issue I have with a lot of people that are really far on the left is I feel like it's just black and white thinking where it's like all Trump people are just racist, homophobic Nazis. And I'm just like, no, they just don't know these things. That's all, you know? They're being told something different.
I hate the line of thinking that says the person who votes against me is my enemy, because let's be real, like these elections have been going back and forth since I was born. I've seen both left-wing and right-wing politicians in seats of power, which means these people who disagree with me for whatever reason make up at least half the population of the country I live in if they're going to have that kind of decision-making power. So just writing them off as not to be understood because I disagree with them is literally not understanding half of the story of the country, the population of millions that I am a part of.
Yeah,
and things are never going to change.
I've said before in the past too on my shows and everywhere else. So yeah.
This is the reason why like nothing gets solved, is because these two sides are constantly divided. The only way for any of this change to happen is to engage the other side and come to an understanding of some sort, you know, or at least try to. Like, that's how I feel. So I'm not for the divisiveness. I just want everyone to be able to talk about these things. So I really appreciate you coming on and talking to us about these issues and educating us. Like, I learned a lot from you. I know you were saying like that I say things that you didn't think about. Like, you said tons of things and I didn't think about that angle at all. So I really appreciated that.
You both said tons of things that I didn't think about. So
I'm glad to hear that.
I'm glad I could be of assistance because like this was a real cool concept. I definitely like the idea of the show.
This was amazing. Great job. You were like, honestly, you were right on point with the themes that we're going for as far as how to talk to other people about these things. So thank you for coming on. All right, we'll let you go.
Send me some links to some of your videos too, like
yeah, I'm gonna do that.
And,
I'll send you a link to my channel.
Yeah, totally.
Her channel is real fun.
I'm sure I'll have a ball. I'm gonna get to a 3:00 appointment though, because they are pulling up right now. So
all right,
timed it perfectly. Love.
Have a good day.
Thanks, Nick.
See you later.
Bye.